Okay, and of course sucking is valuable because we need to feed. So all of these are important and valuable for the development of the infant. And when there's a problem with these, that could indicate problems with development. Okay. Rhythmic creatures, we went into some detail in our first training about just the rhythms of newborns in particular was the focus, having to do with kind of sleep-wake cycles. You know, definitely new parents are concerned that when they take the infant and they bring the infant home, you know, feeding schedules and trying to get them on a feeding schedule. And for the most part, they are very rhythmic, and you can actually have them match after a while. Sometimes it's a month to 2 months. You know, your own, basically, whatever will be the feeding schedule. Okay, but sometimes it does take some time. So usually we reassure parents that they can learn that schedule and structure, but it will take some time, and which is why you see, you know, parents not getting enough sleep within the first, you know, month to a couple of months. But over time, right, the child's sleeping longer, okay, and then feeding more when the mother is awake. Okay, so let's talk about some areas of physical growth. Just review areas. This is continuous throughout childhood, physical growth. Okay, it's definitely not uniform, it fluctuates, and we see that with children. Okay, and again, we're talking about genetics, a big portion of this, genetics and environment. We know that nutrition, abuse, and trauma are all factors that affect growth and maturation. And we've said that before in our child abuse prevention. In fact, so much so, there's cases of abuse where the child didn't really grow, didn't show any indications of growth during that period. And then you take them out of that environment and there'll be a lot of growth. It seems to have been repressed. So it's interesting phenomenon. And definitely we know nutrition will affect growth. We see that with, you know, children in other countries who don't have adequate nutrition, and it definitely affects growth and development. Growth rates, however, vary widely among children. So again, trying to reassure parents that there's a wide variation with a lot of this stuff. So we do look at what's age-related norms, but we also have to keep in mind that the child may be developing normally, okay, given their genetics. And different parts of the body develop at different rates. Okay, so sometimes, you know, you'll see elongated, you know, legs, and you'll see a shorter trunk. So we know that there's different rates of development for different parts. Motor development review. We do know, however, that no matter where we go in the world, there's a predictable sequence of development, even though there's variations. It does go into a particular order. A couple of terms to throw out to you is postural development and locomotion. Okay, so postural development is having to do with your posture. Locomotion is movement. Okay, prehension. Do you know about prehension? You heard that? It has to do with grasping reflexes. So, actually with our first training, we even did an exercise with this, which I don't have today, but if we do this again, I'll have you guys do that, where we had to put them in a certain sequence. So postural development and locomotion and prehension are areas under motor development. Okay, we typically divide them into those two categories: postural development and locomotion on one side, and prehension on the other side. Another couple of terms to know are proximodistal and cephalocaudal. Have you guys heard of either one of those? Okay, proximo basically means it's growth from the middle outward. And cephalocaudal, caudal is tail, ceph is head. It's head to tail growth. Okay? So it's ways in which human beings grow in terms of motor development. That basically we usually gain control over things that are in the center first, you know, before our fingers and toes. So we'll gain more control over these areas before outward. Okay? encephalocaudal head control first before feet. It goes from head to foot. So these are just kind of sequences in terms of direction of development. So when you guys hear about, well, a child should be walking when? Around a year to 15 months. Usually see them stand around a year. Okay, start maybe taking their first steps around 12, 13 months. Okay, we're talking about this here. Postural development and locomotion. Okay, same with crawling. Not all infants crawl though. There's some that crawl and then they move up to pulling themselves up, and then they'll be able to stand erect, sometimes for a few seconds, and then they'll be down, but then they gain strength. Okay, but there are some kids that just move to basically from being on the ground to pulling themselves up, and they skip the crawling. But now we're finding that crawling is actually very important for scanning the environment, that those are infants that seem better at scanning what's going on. So just to kind of differentiate, I want you to know postural development. Okay, so we're talking about their posture becoming more erect, right? And then the locomotion part of it, so the movement part of it and control over the movement part of it. The prehension now. So if you think of a 3-year-old holding a crayon and how they might hold it, or you ask them to put a block, into another, to fit it into a box, and they have to put the block in there. Okay, these are things that develop. Okay, we see in the preschool years, and this is in the area of prehension, it gets more and more fine motor as they get older. Okay, so you might have a younger child, who's under a year, who really cannot, grasp a crayon, and particularly with their finger and their index finger and their thumb. Okay, but once they're hitting preschool, they'll be able to do that. Okay, so you'll see better and better use of their fingers, especially individually, where initially it may not be, you won't see that. So that's the area of prehension. And what we know is that motor development beyond infancy, they just get better and better at this. Okay, so it's more and more coordinated. Okay, so we see fine motor use becoming more refined. So again, in our preview class, we went into detail about these. So if that's something that you feel that you'd want more detail, then we would definitely be able to do that. Okay. And these are some milestones, and we use this for a particular activity that we did, where I actually had little pieces of paper and they had to match up all the sequences. Okay. But these are typical milestones that we look at with children. Okay. And actually this went with the activity, but just to give you an idea, if we ever do the activity, you'd be really, you'd know it already, right? So some of the things you might see in regards to postural development and locomotion. An infant that's under 3 months, being able to turn their head to the side when on stomach. And again, these are just average ranges. There's always children that could be outside of this. At about 3 months, sitting with support. And 6 months can sit alone, but just momentarily, right? And 9 months, we might see your child that's actually sitting alone and holding on to furniture. Okay, attempting to walk. And 12 months, stands alone, and there are some children that can walk with help. And so you might have the parent out there and they're walking. And you usually, around 18 months, can walk pretty well. Okay. And 24 months, then you can see how that locomotion gets even more refined, that they can walk up and down stairs. So about 2 years. So again, toddler years, you think locomotion, right? Which is why it drives parents crazy. They're all over the place. Okay. And again, these are just milestones. This is what we gauge. So when people go into the home and they're actually doing assessments on development in this area, this is what they're using. Okay? And there'll be particular tasks that they'll have them do, particularly with the prehension, to see where they're at. But again, for the most part, the children we work with are not going to be within any of these norms. But you need to know the norms to know that, right? Prehension milestones. Okay, well, I already mentioned we've seen the palmar reflex, which is the grasping reflex. Okay, see that in newborns. At about 3 months, they would have already been given a ton of rattles lightly, so they can actually grasp one. And 6 months, grasping a cube with flexion of the fingers. So again, they're not really able to use the fingers individually in control of them, but they are able to grasp the cube. And at 9 months now, they're having greater control over the fingers individually. So forefinger and thumb. By about 12 months, they can hold a crayon to make a mark. And children over a year, you can see them scribbling. And definitely by about 24 months, they're now able to place objects, which is why we have a lot of toys that are geared for that, where they have to match up the shape with the block and put it in a board. So just understanding that, these areas and what we call them in child development. So this is prehension. And so if you have someone come in the home, in fact, many of these families probably already have at some point, or had maybe a regional center person come in and work with their child and have them do some of these tasks. Okay. And beyond the scope of this training, but we know that movements become more skilled. Between 2 and 7, it just becomes more and more refined in both of those areas. There's other types of movements that have to do locomotor, so running. Manipulative might be something like throwing or controlling a ball. And stability has to do with balance, if they had to balance on a beam, okay, or walk across a beam, which is why even before kindergarten they have them do some of these things. These are other just types of movements that we've categorized in the research. So we've further been able to designate them as being these types, and we assess how they're doing in those areas. So that way we can further determine maybe if the child is delayed and what particular area of motor development are they really having problems with that we might want to focus in on. And there are a lot of children that have trouble with tasks that involve sensory integration. So when they have to do 2 different things at one time, they have to stomp their feet and clap. And a lot of kids may have trouble with that, but there's some that, again, it's going to fall below the norm, so they may need more help in that.